Lane Jordan Burdett, along with Lisa Burkhart Worley, and welcome to Pop Talk, the show where you never know what topics might pop up. If you are a mom or dad, do you have trouble reaching an agreement with your spouse on how to parent your children? Do you hit roadblocks on discipline, house rules? Then you will want to listen to today's show because our guest may have some solutions for you.
Well, thank you so much, Lane. I only wish I had known about our guest when our kids were younger. His name is Cecil Taylor, and we have actually interviewed him on Pop Talk before, but he has a brand new book out about parenting called Unison Parenting, the comprehensive guide to Christian parenthood with one voice. Now, before we get into the topic of parenting, let me tell you about Cecil Taylor. He has a background in high-tech software development and product management. He also spent some time as a sports broadcaster, a background that he and I share. He's also spent 30 plus years in youth ministry, teaching adult Sunday school classes, and has 15 years experience of teaching parenting classes. He's written a number of books, including From Comfort Zone to Trust Zone, Live Like You're Loved, and The Next Thing, a Christian model for dealing with crisis in personal life. But today we're going to be speaking about his new book called Unison Parenting. So welcome back to Pop Talk, Cecil. I know my husband and I did not always agree when it came to parenting our kids. And so I'm wondering right off the bat, why is it important to be like-minded as parents?
Well, first, Lisa and Lane, thank you so much for having me on today. And first, I want to say that being like-minded unison parents is like unison singing in a choir. So in a choir, when all the voices sing the same note at the same time, the composer creates that in order to emphasize the message. And as parents, we want to do the same thing. If we are focused on the same message, then it will come through easier to the child. So we need to be in unison. We don't want to confuse the child by having different priorities or sets of rules. That's very unsettling for the child, and it can make them feel insecure. And it can also lead to manipulation. Children can learn very early on how to play one parent against the other to get what they want. And when a child learns to manipulate at home, they can try to manipulate their way through life as well, and that's not a healthy approach. So it all comes down to agreeing on values and agreeing on techniques for embedding those values in your children on a daily basis throughout all their ages and stages.
Oh, I love that you brought up values. That's exactly what you need to be focused on more than anything. Well, in your book, you speak about proactive and reactive parenting. I'd love for you to explain the difference between those two.
Yeah, Lane, these are the fundamentals that we start with. Proactive parenting is about steady state policies, defining those core values, the rules that go with the values, the consequences for breaking the rules, and the rewards for good behavior. Now, it's a flexible framework to deal with everyday life variations, but generally it's a model for consistency in the child's life. And then reactive parenting is not knee-jerk parenting. I want to emphasize that. The way I define reactive parenting, it's about how you react to truly unexpected situations not covered by your steady state framework. You need an alternate path to kick in so you can stay on the same page in different situations. So the heart of reactive parenting is this three-step model: identify, question, communicate. Identify that this is an out of bounds or unusual situation, ask questions to get more information, and communicate with your parenting partner or partners so that you're in sync on what to do. I share in the book that my biggest parenting mistake was in a reactive situation. I was confronted with something very unusual. I wasn't sure how to respond to it. I did the first two steps of identifying and questioning, but I didn't do the third step of communicating with my wife. And she would have brought in other questions, and she would have surely said no, whereas I said, yes, something kind of like that. And so proactive and reactive parenting are partner techniques that help us to address any situation.
Yeah, I like that. It's important. I think communication is extremely important between the parents, whether you're a married couple or whether maybe you're in a divorce situation. You've got, two different families. So you talk about choices, a choices contract. I thought that was really interesting. What is that, and what are some of the choices you and your family must agree on?
Well, first, let's talk about the reasons to create a choices contract. It's a way to take that family philosophy and framework and implement it in daily life. And we also want to emphasize the importance of choices and personal responsibility to the child. And this is a way to do that by using that term choices all the time. You're making choices with your life. And then essentially you outline the expected behaviors and the consequences of not meeting inspection of those behaviors. So we're trying to move from expectations to inspection. We don't expect, we inspect. And we also build in rewards, particularly when we see them exemplify valued behaviors. Now, in our case, a family could come up with any kind of list of values and choices. Ours we called the 7 C's because there were 7 words that each started with C: chores, cleanliness, courtesy, caring, conforming, classwork, and church. And let me delve into a couple of these. Chores teach participation in the family unit and personal responsibility to the group. I think this is important because all throughout a person's life, they're going to either be in a family slash home setting with someone. It could be an apartment roommate or whatever, or they'll be in a group in a work setting perhaps. And you have obligations to the whole group. You're not just solo. So this teaches from the beginning that we all have responsibilities. Conforming, technically, it's being obedient the first time you're told to do something. In practice, there may be some leniency on the timing or even some discussion on what needs to be done. But if it turns toward the child stalling or refusing, then it's a violation. And then church, our mantra was church is what we do. We go to church, we go to Sunday school, we participate, and we don't misbehave. So those are just some of them, and I could go through the other ones, but it'll take a while to go through each one. But you get the spirit of that. Now, one thing I want to point out is, as the child gets into, say, elementary school, or your kids get to be about that age, there's a power in letting the child or children set the consequences for the violations with parental agreement, of course. And this steers the parents away from making up consequences in anger, right? We don't want to do that. It also creates buy-in. So let me give an example of what that's like. You don't have the kinds of arguments and so forth. You have more harmony in the family. We would have a situation, let's say that we've identified a violation, and there might be some discussion over whether that occurred. And then they'd be, okay, Dad, what's my consequence? I said, I don't know. You're the one who came up with it. You and the other kids. Go look on the wall and tell me what it is. So they trot off, and then they come back and they say, well, it's no seeing friends for 3 days. I'm like, okay, great. That's what it is. And there's no argument because we've already had the discussion of that. Now, as the child goes into the teen years, you still need a structure like this, but the consequences are different. You might have a consequence that says no snack after school. That doesn't mean much for a teenager, right? So you also need to start covering specialized situations such as driving and dating and more. So that could either be a formal or informal contract as to those agreements. And let me add one thing that I used to tell my kids when they got into high school. I said, look, here's the consequence for this, right? Here's our agreed consequence. But whatever consequence I give you does not match the consequence life will give you. Life will give you bigger consequences than me. So, we could ground you for a month, but if you drive badly to cause a wreck and injure someone, or if you get pregnant or get someone pregnant, life gives you bigger consequences than being grounded for a month, right? So you're now getting into a point where my consequences are not what you should fear. It's life's consequences.
Oh my goodness. I love all these points that you have shared. And I have a new grandson, and I'm going to share that little grandson's parents about your C's. I love the C's, but for them to make the consequence. Okay, that's so cool. Well, this next question is sort of what you've already been talking about, is maybe explain again how important communication is in a family environment. Obviously, it's huge. but I want you to dwell on it. And how can parents engage their kids in communication, especially those teenagers who don't want to talk?
Yeah, that's right. Well, Lane, probably every question will have something with communication in the answer, right? So you're right about that. It comes down really communication between people and how it works in either personal or business settings. You always have to keep working at it, be as precise as possible, find the right format and time for communication. You must sometimes over communicate, repeat things. You must sit down and talk more than you think you ought to have to, right? So those are some of the things. But let me talk about the teen years because I have some useful tactics in the book, and I have one piece of gold that I tell people it's worth the price of the book on its own because it's how to get your teen to talk to you. I mean, how many parents have that problem? My teen won't talk to me. Lisa knows it. So I've had readers come back and say, we used these techniques and got instant results in bonding with our teen. Now, I'm not going to put any guarantee that you're going to get instant results, but I will tell you the technique I'm talking about. I've taught it in parenting classes. I've never had someone come back and say it didn't work. In fact, what they usually complain about, it works too well and I can't get my teen to stop talking. Now, wouldn't that be a great problem to have, right? So anyway, this is so there's some things in the book that will guide people on how you talk to your teen.
Like I said, I wish I would have seen this book a long, long time ago. Both my kids are grown. I have a 35-year-old and a 28-year-old. But when my 28-year-old was in school, high school, I would pick him up and I'd say, "How was your day?" "Okay." "What did you do?" "Nothing." I'm like, "Nothing? You went to school all day and you did nothing?" He just
Right.
didn't want to talk to me. That was his way of
Right.
shutting down. He just didn't have any interest in it. Now he talks a lot, but I wish he would have shared with me and kind of involved me in what he was doing back then. So I need some pointers, I guess maybe like Lane said, for our grandchildren who have been born and who are growing up. Now, you talked about proactive and reactive parenting, but you also discuss adaptive parenting in your book. How does that work in a family environment?
Adaptive parenting is about understanding that a child is not static. We adults, we change very slowly, actually. A child is changing very quickly. And in fact, that's one reason when they get to be teens, we say, oh, there's a monster in my house now, because they're changing rapidly and not in a linear fashion. It's erratic. That's really not a teen problem. That's a parenting problem for not adapting. So with adaptive parenting, all the way through a child's life, through the ages and stages, you're looking for signs of change and how to meet this new person who's now occupying your house. Let me give you an example from youth ministry. I always remember this young man who was, when he was in middle school, he would kind of stand off to the side, away from everybody else. He didn't want to be physically, he wanted this physical space around him. If you put your hand on his shoulder, he would physically pull away from you. Well, one Sunday he comes to church and he's hugging all the girls. And so did I take it as, oh, wow, the hormones kicked in and now he's after the girls? No. I said, this is a new guy. I need to go meet him. And I sat down and talked with him. And it was like speaking to a completely different person. So the outward sign was this hugging all the girls. The inward change was much more sweeping than that. And that's what we have to recognize in our children is you're looking for signs of change. Parents being in unison is very important. My wife was so valuable to me to help me identify when things were changing so I didn't have an old view of the kid. We'll go, well, you always like tomatoes. Well, you don't like tomatoes now. Why are you different? Well, they change, right? So that's just an example. Another way to describe adaptive parenting is that you want to grow the child's decision making based on each stage of their life. So broadly, I divide it into 0 to 6, 6 to 12, 12 to 18, but it's much more granular than that. As the child ages, you allow them more choices so they can gradually have more control until the time they reach adulthood and make their own choices.
Okay, that is so cool. I just love that story about that young man. And also, we need to remember that, yeah, they're changing and we need to change also. We also thought it was interesting that you identified 4 different types of parents in your chapter on supportive parenting. Can you share with us an overview of those types of parents? And maybe Lisa and I, as well as our listeners, will relate to one of those categories.
I'm going to tell you, Lane, this is the most challenging chapter in the book. It requires the most humility, the most soul searching. It can take you back to your childhood and how you were raised. There are 4 parenting styles, but only one is optimal. So I want you to imagine 2 dimensions: expressions of love and enforcement of limits or rules. So when you don't express love but are high on enforcement, that's the dominant style. And it's actually the most damaging style, with long run ramifications to the child all the way up into adulthood. At the other end, if you express love but you lack enforcement, then that's the permissive style, which can lead to manipulation. And this child actually wants some boundaries. They want to know that somebody cares enough about them to put some boundaries on them. Now, let me share a personal story. I talked about the humility and soul searching. Based on a fellow parent's feedback, when my kids were in preschool, I had to identify and admit that I was permissive and inconsistent, which is why my kids were always trying to manipulate me. So I had to get that fixed. But it started with somebody helping me, and then also me being willing to admit that, hey, I'm not doing this right. And that's why I'm getting these results. Now, the third type of style is the parent who neither expresses love nor enforces limits. And this is the neglectful style. And it's a very sad situation that also has long-term ramifications. The child will feel worthless as a result of this. And then what's optimal is expressing love and enforcing limits, and that's the loving and firm style. It's a balance. So we've talked about the choices chart. I want to mention just a moment about loving environment. And I want to give you a success story, some evidence from our family. When my kids were freshmen in college, sophomore in high school, and a 6th grader, I asked them their view on our family context. I said, what is our family about? So they came back to me with 5 things: acceptance, communication, more fun than humans should be allowed to have. I like that one. Parents give breathing space to their children, and we've all made bad choices, but we're all good people. And let me tell you, I don't think you get that list without creating a loving environment that has communication, forgiveness, and valuing each person for who they are.
That is great. We used to try to do forced family fun night where we have, you're talking about fun. And that didn't really carry on for very long because they always had something else to do. But we really tried to do that to make it a fun environment for them to be at home. And we always wanted to be the place where they were able to bring their friends and
Absolutely.
that kind of thing, that their friends could trust us. And I'm still friends with like Facebook friends with some of my kids' friends, right? And I've watched them grow up and get married. And so it's really fun to see the kids, their friends grow up, because you had some impact on them, I think, as some influence. So for the most part, though, we've been speaking about families where the husband and wife are both the biological parents or adoptive parents of the children. But let's talk about blended families. There are just a ton of those these days. What are some ways that divorced parents can be in unison with each other when it comes to parenting our kids?
Well, I'm glad you brought this up, because only 46% of U.S. children live in a household that we consider traditional, man-woman first marriage. So that tells you that more than half of kids are not in that traditional family. Now, I do have a special section of the book on non-traditional family situations, but when you get down to the basics, whenever any parenting partners are out of sync, it's a problem. I mean, you could be amicably divorced and get along with parenting, and you could be in the same household and be polar opposites. But still, at the same time, the more parenting partners you have involved, the more variances and opinions, problems can come. So I recommend that people get educated on how to parent in unison and parent in the optimal style. I do not think it's hopeless. I think it's possible for people to do it, although I realize sometimes personalities prevent it or limit it. And the key is to agree that all of your actions are for the sake of the child. I repeat that phrase throughout the book so many times: for the sake of the child. It's not for yourselves. It's not for winning a power struggle. It's for knowing the best outcomes that arise from that loving and firm style and committing to put yourself aside for the sake of the child.
I love how you said for the sake of the child. That just touched my heart because it is all about the child. It's not
It
about our
is.
ego. And that's why I loved earlier you mentioned something about being humble. I loved it. Okay, well, this is when parenting gets hard. It changes when our kids begin to grow up and enter high school. I know I had to have a contract with my high school daughter, my youngest daughter, and she laughed about it. She signed the contract because I said, if you talk disrespect, it was mainly disrespectful talking. Then first I take away your phone and then I take away the keys to your car. And she laughed, well, I had to do it one day, but it helped. But now they're driving, which of course scares the wits out of us. And then they begin to date. And to me, that's very scary because what type of people are they around? How does parenting change during these years? And of course, the big question, how can we be in unison with our spouse when our kids are teens?
I'm going to tell you, based on my 30 years in youth ministry and then also from just raising kids myself, my biggest recommended change in parenting approach is to lean into collaboration and have a common goal. So, say you have a new freshman in high school, you sit them down and you say, you have 4 years to become a functioning adult in society. That should scare them right there. And it should scare you. And I have the same goal as you do to get to that point. So let's work together during these teen years to get there. Growing your decision making bit by bit. Now, there's going to be times you make mistakes. I'll be there as a guardrail and a safety net. There's going to be times I even don't allow you to make that decision. But I want you to trust me that my goal isn't to hold you down, but to get you ready to fly. So I think that's one thing that the most important thing we can do. And I share some techniques in the book on how to identify and develop their readiness and decision making. During the teen years, you ask about parents staying on the same page. I'd say, parents are getting a little tired of parenting at that stage. And really, it's a time to keep your energy up, your focus, your discipline, and boost each other up in doing that.
Cecil, this is obviously a faith-based program, and you are a man of faith. We've talked about that. And I've been around many families, however, I taught Sunday school for 10 years. And so where one parent is a believer and the other is not, how does a parent who wants to raise a child in the church reconcile this when the other parent chooses to not attend church? And perhaps, let's put it this way too, they may say, I don't want you going to church. I don't want you taking the child to church. What do you do?
Yeah, you've hit on the key thing that you need to do. Somehow you, bottom line, need to get the agreement from this parent not to oppose the commitment to raising a child in a church environment and to say, look, they'll make their own spiritual decisions when they're an adult. Let's at least give them the grounding and let them decide for themselves. And so as you get to a point where they're not opposing and just allowing it to happen, then that's the perspective I think you want. Now, one surprising thing, this may be surprising to you, but I've seen it many, many times. The child growing up into a teen can become a spiritual leader in the family and can be the one to get one or both parents to attend church. Now, whether they keep at it after the teen leaves home, I don't know. But I'll say that the first thing is to reduce and agree to not oppose it.
I have seen that in families, Cecil. I'm so glad you shared that, where a teenager just gets on. We're seeing it around the country where there's revivals, and it's mainly teens, and that will pull in a parent. Well, one thing I think is a difficult part of parenting is when both parents work full time. And that means kids may not get the attention they need. Why is it important to be attentive to our children and actually monitor what they are doing? And you pretty much answered that, but maybe focus on the two job parenting.
Yeah, parents who work full-time jobs are tired, but it doesn't mean they can slack off on their parenting, unfortunately. And you see in two-earner families the trend toward the neglectful style. So working parents should be aware of this and work to combat it. I think you need to reserve time to be fully attentive and present for your child. When I had the 3 kids and I'd come home and I knew they were waiting for me, I would sometimes just sit in the driveway until I was ready to engage with them. And I would engage with them until they went to bed. And then I would try to do my at-home work or my personal need attendance and that kind of thing. There's this word attentive, and it has a second meaning covered in the book's last chapter. When your kids are teens and have the ability to be at distance from you, you need to be attentive to their situations. So when the kids are little, we practically want a background check on everybody coming into contact with them. But the greater danger to me is in the teen years. Who are they with? What are they doing? What are the homes like they're going into? Do the parents share values with me or not? And usually the answers are not as good as you would hope. So partly you collaborate with your child to get the answers you want about the environment, and partly you monitor your child's behavior. So on the night that they're out, one parent has got to be on duty. I don't care how late you got to stay up. You got to stay up till curfew. You got to check them when they come home. You need to see what condition they're in, at least subtly. And that on-duty parent may be the one to pull the plug on an activity and go pick them up if they don't drive or can't drive. So there's a lot of detail to it in the book, in that chapter, but hopefully you get the idea of how you need to be attentive.
I want to say one thing real quick here. We're getting close to the end of the show, but Cecil, I am so in agreement with you. One parent at least has got to be there for the child. And I did attend seminary while my kids were in school. And I remember getting up at 4:30 in the morning to study, and then I'd wait until after they went to bed to study. I didn't take their time away. I gave them their time, but then I just burned the candle at both ends in order to get that schooling finished. So we have to do what we have to do in order to be there for our kids.
Absolutely. You get a gold star for that, Lisa.
Oh, I agree. And may I share one thing you said that I think went to the heart of our listeners when you said sometimes I have to just sit in the car and get ready to go in. I wasn't expecting that from you because you think, oh, you've been a youth pastor and and you're perfect. But we all have a hard time raising. I was a single mother. And so when you said you've got to stay up, let me tell you, I was up, I was there, I knew where she was, and it's hard. But thank you for sharing that. And let me share that this has been such a great interview, Cecil. I
Thank you.
know it has been helpful for the parents listening who want to see eye to eye with their spouse and then how to raise their children the best way possible. For the listeners, please go to this book. Cecil's book is called Unison Parenting, the Comprehensive Guide to Navigating Christian Parenthood with One Voice. You can find Cecil and learn more about all his ministries at his website, unisonparenting.com. That's UNISON parenting.com. And Cecil will be coming out with a newsletter in January. So I know you'll want to go on the website and sign up for this wonderful newsletter. Cecil also says anyone who goes to his website can receive a free e-copy of the book while on the site. Ooh, I'm going to do that.
I know. I'll hand it to my kids. And we would love for you to contact us here at Pop Talk and Pearls of Promise. You can email us at info@pearlsofpromiseministries.com. You can like us on Facebook and follow us on X at Pop Talk Media or at Pearls of Promise. We're on Instagram at Pop_Ministries, and you will want to check out all of our Pop Talk TV shows, podcasts, and award-winning documentaries on our YouTube channel at Pearls of Promise. So that is Pop Talk for today. We're just ordinary girls
Who God turned into pearls. Have a wonderful week.